Welcome to a series where we deep dive on every NFL team's offseason from the very beginning when head coaches are being hired all the way to present day with preseason happening. I'm trying to be as unbiased as possible. I'm not a biased Falcons fan. I can acknowledge when we suck, which we don't suck, we're average. 7-10 every year, 8-9 last year. Ooh, big step up, which is great. This year, we're hoping for a winning season, and things are looking pretty bright with Raheem Morris. Now, he does have a 29-47 overall record. This includes him with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the early 2010s, and then also him as an interim head coach with the Falcons after Dan Quinn was let go. 38% of the time he's winning his games, not great. However, the Falcons brass, the front office, they acknowledge that Raheem, he has matured. They believe that he has turned it around, that when he was first a head coach in the NFL, they don't want to hold that against them. They believe that this is a different Raheem Morris, which time will tell. We'll see if this season is any different. Offensively, Zach Robinson, he's the OC going into his second year, came from the Rams. Last year, they were ranked 6th in the NFL offensively in yards per game. And you wouldn't believe it because of Kirk Cousins, his injury, and the poor performances that he had that 4-game stretch. But they leaned in a lot on Bijan Robinson, on Michael Penix. When he came in, he looked great. Not to mention Kirk, before he got hurt, looked fantastic as well. Had over 500 yards passing, actually, in that Thursday night game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Jeff Ulbrich is the defensive coordinator. Defensively, this is where they needed to improve heavily. For the last few years, actually, the Falcons have lacked a pass rush. They were ranked 23rd in the NFL last year. Hopefully this year, they turned it around with the offseason picks that they had, which we'll talk about in just a second. Let's lean in on the free agency adds and losses that they acquired. Let's lean in on the losses first. So Matthew Judon, Lorenzo Carter, Justin Simmons, Richie Grant. These were starters on their team that they lost. However, it's not that big of a deal that they lost those specific players because even though those players had their bright moments, they are replaceable. And they tried to replace them with Justin Simmons. They replaced them with Jordan Fuller. That was a big free agent signing for them at safety. And then Judon and Carter, it's a 3-4 defense, so you needed those outside linebackers. They got 2 big guys, which we'll talk about in just a bit in the NFL draft. But the biggest losses are Grady Jarrett and Drew Dahlman. Both of those guys do go over to the Chicago Bears. I will say Leonard Floyd is a very underrated signing. Floyd, people will say, oh, he's washed up. He's 32 years old. But he was actually a starter the last couple seasons when he was with the Bills and the Rams. And he was actually pretty good in those games. Played all 17 games, wasn't hurt. So he could actually technically be the starter on the depth chart and work into some rotational pieces with the new draft picks that they acquired. So let's talk about those draft picks with the first round picks. Plural, because Jalen Walker was drafted round 1, pick 15. And then later on, they traded up round 1, pick 26 to get James Pierce Jr. 2 edges, 2 outside linebackers that they're going to be utilizing in this 3-4 defense. The story on how they required both of these edge rushers is actually pretty remarkable. So Jalen Walker was not supposed to fall outside of the top 10. He was a top 10 talent, but the Falcons, who had James Pierce Jr. locked in, they wanted to draft him at number 15. They saw Walker fell, and they were like, we're not going to pass up on the top 10 talent. And then they were able to trade back up into the late 20s to acquire the guy that they've always wanted, James Pierce Jr. Now, they did give up a second-round pick from this year's draft and a first-rounder from next year, but to the Falcons, they don't believe it's a big deal. Okay, you lose out on second-rounder, but next year, that first-rounder, they got their first-rounder from next year, this year. That's how the Falcons are viewing it. For Pierce Jr., I will say he did fall because of character concerns. However, the Falcons, according to reports, they talked to his family, they talked to his mother. They believe that he got over those character issues. Talent-wise, he could have easily been a top 15 pick, and that stays true with everything coming out of training camp in the preseason. Pierce has looked great. They believe that they got a steal in the late 20s. Moving on with the draft picks, Xavier Watts was drafted in the 3rd round. We talked about Justin Simmons moving on. That free agent signing, it just didn't work out for them. And they signed Jordan Fuller, but Xavier Watts and also DeMarco Hellams is going to be competing for a safety spot as well. Let's take a look at the projected starters for offense, that depth chart. Starting with the quarterback position, Michael Penix. This is his show. Kirk Cousins will be the quarterback too. And we don't expect Cousins to be traded unless an injury were to occur to a contending team's quarterback position. At that point, you could move him before the trade deadline, but we expect Cousins to be on the roster for the remainder of 2025. Regardless, this will be Cousins last year with the Falcons, given the contract, given that after this season you could let him go, and it's not that big of a cap hit. Moving on to skill position players, Bijan Robinson, running back 1, no question about it. It's going to be carrying the ball 300+ times, also being utilized with wide receivers in training camp, so he's lining up in some formations. Wide receivers and an 11 personnel, it's Drake London, Darnell Mooney, and Ray McLeod. London and Penix had this weird chemistry, or awesome chemistry, I should say, in the last 3 games that Penix started. He looked great. He was on pace, if he played a full 17-game season, to get 1,900 yards receiving. Obviously, we don't expect that this year. We'll talk about that when we get to projected stats. But with Darnell Mooney, he's currently dealing with an injury, and he is expected to be sidelined up until week 1. If he's not back by week 1, maybe week 2. But in the meantime, Ray McLeod is playing in that X spot in training camp and preseason. And then Kadero Hodge is working in the slot. To the tight end, Kyle Pitts, who's in a prove-it year. I will say this, Zach Robinson, on May 5th, the offensive coordinator, he said that he expects Pitts to have a big leap in year 2 with this offense. And then also Michael Penix has been targeting Pitts a lot in training camp. He's been looking great. Penix even joked with the media and said, "Did you see how we threw the ball a lot to Pitts? There's going to be lots of that in 2025. So will he get back to the form that he was in his rookie season? Possibly. But we do expect a big leap compared to years past for Kyle Pitts in 2025. Over to the offensive line, everything kind of stays the same. Jake Matthews and Caleb McGarry are going to be on the outside. McGarry, he has his games. Sometimes it's not the best performances, but sometimes he does look really good, and the Falcons believe that he's the best option for them. Jake Matthews, very underrated. What a staple for the Falcons franchise. Matthew Bergeron, what a blessing he was to find a left guard, a starting left guard, in the 2nd round just a couple years ago. And then Chris Lindstrom, their starting left guard that they drafted a few years ago back in 2019, alongside Caleb McGarry. He's been great as well, all-pro guard. But now that Dahlman leaves, I think the 2 people that you want to focus in on are, 1, Newsel, obviously taking over at center, and then 2, Caleb McGarry's. Like I said, sometimes he has his game, sometimes he doesn't. Can he stay consistent in 2025? Moving on to the projected starters for defense. In a 3-4 defense, you're going to have 3 defensive linemen. We expect it to be Zach Harrison, that 3rd-round pick from a few years ago. And then the other defensive end, Ruke Orororo, is going to be a starting defensive end. Now, he could interchange with David Onyemata as that starting nose tackle. However, I'm going to give the nod to Onyemata just because he's about 25 to 30 pounds heavier than Ruke. Moving on to the linebackers, Leonard Floyd and Arnold Ebiketie, I have as the starting outside linebackers. You may look at this and be like, where the heck is Jalen Walker and James Pierce Jr.? We spent 2 first-round picks, traded up for one of them. Why are they not starting? They are going to get plenty of work in this Jeff Ulbrich defense. Do not worry about that. Just because they're not labeled as a starter does not mean that they're not going to be on the field plenty of times. Ebiketie, I mean, I think he led the Falcons in sacks last year, if I'm not mistaken. So obviously he's going to have a role, and you give the nod to the veteran as a starter. Leonard Floyd, as I mentioned, the last 2 years, despite being over 30, has started 17 games for the Bills, 17 games for the Rams, and he has actually looked pretty decent in all those games. So he's going to get the nod as the veteran, as the starters. Don't be alarmed, Falcons fans. Jalen Walker and James Pierce Jr. are going to get their run. Over in the secondary, Jesse Bates, one of, if not the best safety in the NFL. AJ Terrell, a great outside lockdown corner, opposite of Mike Hughes. So nothing changing here except that free safety spot. Will it be Jordan Fuller? Will it be Xavier Watts, the rookie that they drafted in the 3rd round? Heck, DeMarco Helms, who's more of a strong safety, could he play a little bit of free safety? Moving on to special teams, Jamal Agnew is the only big change here, the free agent acquisition. NFL record holder, Jamal Agnew, I might add. He's going to be returning kicks and punts. Younghoe Koo, I will say this. I almost bought a Falcons jersey last year when he tied against the Buccaneers and sent us to overtime. And then I held off on that once he started missing a lot of kicks. But hopefully he does well. He was dealing with an injury last year. I wish nothing but the success for Koo. He's one of my favorite Falcons players. Actually met him before. Really good guy. But they did add in Lenny Krieg, the German-born kicker from the international program that the NFL has. Jordan Mailata came from that. I do believe with the international program, you can carry an extra person without it counting against the 53-man roster. I'm not like 100% certain on that fact, so don't quote me on it. But I think I'm like 85, 90% sure that's the case. So Krieg, who's not going to get released because 1, he's not going to count against the roster limit. And then 2, just nailed a 57-yard field goal in preseason against the Lions. So could Krieg battle with Younghoe Koo for that starting kicker position if Koo continues to miss any kicks? To our next segment, the projected stats for the Atlanta Falcons offense. With the quarterback position, Michael Penix, I am being very, very modest and kind of giving him the floor, if you will say, for these projected stats. 25 touchdowns to 13 interceptions. Like I said, I'm an unbiased Falcons fan, so I will just look at the floor and I will say 13 interceptions. There's going to be some growing pains that come along with being in essentially your rookie season. It's a little bit better than a rookie year, but if this is your first year playing as a full-time starter, could he throw for 4,400 yards? Absolutely. Can he throw for over 30 touchdowns? Of course. Can he throw for over 64, 65, 66% of his passes? Yes, absolutely. But I'm being modest. The sky's the limit, honestly, with what Penix can do, especially in the run game, because 60 attempts for 330 yards and 5 touchdowns is what we project for Penix. Zach Robinson stated this offseason that Penix is a very underrated rusher. He ran a 4.4 something in the 40-yard dash. So he said that he's going to be utilizing his athleticism a little bit. So we bumped up his rushing numbers just a bit. But 60 attempts is kind of where I'm expecting Penix to be at. Over at running back, Bijan Robinson, 314 attempts for 1,400 yards. 1,476, that is, in our projections, 4th in the NFL in rushing yards, what we think for 2025. So behind Saquon Barkley, Derrick Henry, and Jonathan Taylor. 4.7 yards per carry, also being utilized in the passing game like we talked about in training camp. 69, nice. Targets is what we project. 52 receptions, 400 yards receiving. Now, I will say this. Bijan has also stated in late July to the media that the Falcons have outlandish goals in the run game. Take that however you want. Over at wide receivers, Drake London, like we talked about, was on this amazing pace. If he played all 17 games with Penix, he would have put up 1,900 yards receiving and 16 touchdowns. 151 targets, 95 receptions, 1,200 yards receiving, and 8 receiving touchdowns. That is very, very, very similar to the season that he had last year. Then Darnell Mooney, we talked about, could be injured week 1, could be playing. He could be a 1,000-yard receiver, but 970 yards and 6 receiving touchdowns. Still very solid season by Darnell Mooney. And then Ray McCloud is going to be utilized in that slot. 55 receptions, 611 yards, and a touchdown. And then to wrap it up, the tight end, Kyle Pitts. Like we mentioned, this is a bounce back year that everybody expects for him. 56 catches for 762 yards and 5 receiving touchdowns for Pitts. Now that catch percentage is 60% only. Let's see if he can get that higher, because a lot of tight ends, they get in the 70s, 75% catch percentage. However, the way that he's utilized more as a vertical threat, so that catch percentage is going to be lower. But if him and Penix get on the same page, he could have a lot more catches and a lot more yards. And then to wrap up the video, we have record projection. I don't like to give just one record and say the Falcons are going to finish with this many wins, and anything outside of that is completely wrong. I like to give a window, a floor, and a ceiling. This is the minimum games that the Falcons are going to win. This is the maximum. And if we put up the graphic, what I expect for them, the floor is to be 7-10 as average as they are every single year, 7-10, 8-9. That's the floor. The ceiling is what we expect for them is 10-7. What I expect for them is to hit their ceiling and to go 10-7 and make the postseason. Could they be better than 10-7? Absolutely. But I wanted to cap off their ceiling because just looking at their schedule, they have a lot of swing games that could go back and forth where you just truly don't know who's going to win. All division games could be split 3-3. The Seahawks, the Cardinals, the 49ers, that whole NFC West, even the Rams, the Vikings. Right now with the Falcons, the way the tiebreakers played out when we projected the schedule, it ended up being that the Falcons made the playoffs. But if one of those NFC West teams, 2 of them, beat the Falcons and all of these teams are tied 10-7, those teams might have the tiebreaker and the Falcons could be inside looking out. So the NFC, it's pretty competitive. Going 11-6 for sure guarantees you a playoff spot. Don't believe they're going to win the division. I believe that's going to go to the Bucs. But the Falcons, right now, what we're projecting is 10-7. But that's my opinion on the Atlanta Falcons for 2025. If you agree or disagree with anything that was mentioned in this video, leave a comment down below. And also make sure to leave a comment on whether you want this series to continue or not. Like I said, the viewership just hasn't been up there with the amount of work and editing that goes into these videos. So it would take a lot of convincing to continue the series. But if you guys want this series to continue, leave a comment down below. Make sure to hit that subscribe button as well if you guys aren't subscribed. With all that said, thank you guys so much for watching this video, and Falcons rise up. ATL, ho!